Now that we know how to use the material editor inside of Unreal, let's look at how to create our first simple material. Before we create the material, let's look at how we define an object's materials. So for our parquet floor here, we can see on the details panel, while it's selected, we have the option to change the material here. Bear in mind, however, that when you define the material for an object here in the details panel, it's going to be just for that object. As an example, let's go ahead and specify a different material here. We can either select it from this drop-down menu here, or we can browse for a material in our content browser. I can then drag the material onto the element here, and this applies the material to that object. However, let's go back up and grab another copy of this geometry and drag it into the scene. We can see here that this copy does not have that material applied to it. In order to do that, we need to open this object in the static mesh editor, and then on the right here under the details panel, we can specify the material here. So we'll do a search for m_parquet. Then we need to save. Now this will be applied to all versions of this object that we drag into the scene. Unreal fully supports multi-material objects. For instance, this bar stool here, when we select it and look on the details panel, we can see that it has two materials applied to it. Element 0 is a red leather material, and element 1 is the chrome material. Likewise, if we double-click the asset and bring up the static mesh editor, these materials are defined in here. We can specify a different material for each piece. Now we're ready to create our new material. We'll go up to the Content folder, and we'll create a new folder here and call it Materials. Let's go into that folder. Now we can right-click and choose Material. When creating new assets in Unreal, it's best to follow a naming convention. This will make it easier for the rest of your team or whoever might be looking at the assets to be able to find specific assets such as materials. For materials, it's often best to use something like m_ and then the name of your material. So we'll just call this wood floor. When naming your assets, avoid special characters except for underscores, which are used in place of spaces. Double-click the material and we'll open it in the Material Editor window. We'll start out with something very simple here. We're just going to plug our textures into the Material Result node here, and specifically we want base color, roughness, and normal. Remember, we don't need metallic because this isn't a metallic surface, and we're going to leave the specular value at the default of 0.5. For base color, we'll need a texture expression. So hold down T on the keyboard and left-click to create a texture sample expression. From here, we'll go down to the Details panel and we'll choose our texture from the drop-down. We'll do a search for floor, base, color. And it will plug the top output here into the base color input. This gives us the RGBA value. Another way to populate this texture sample is to drag and drop the texture into it. So we can go to the Textures folder, grab the texture, and drag it into the green highlighted texture field here. As this surface is not metallic, we can simply skip over the metallic input, which is defaulted to 0. We'll also skip specular and move on to roughness. Once again, we'll hold down T on the keyboard and left-click to create a texture sample. This time we only need the red channel output, and we'll plug that into our roughness. Selecting the texture sample, we'll do a search in the drop-down for T floor glossiness. And now we have our roughness map applied. Last of all, we need to add our normal map. Again, holding down T on the keyboard, left-click, and this time we'll drag the RGB output. In our search box, we need to search for T floor normal. Now this is a very simple, very basic material for our floor that includes our base color, as well as roughness and a normal map. So we'll go ahead and apply and save this. Now when you apply, you're compiling the material. Just bear in mind that if you hit save instead of hitting apply, it compiles and saves the material. So you can save a step. All right, and let's go ahead and grab our new material and drag it onto the surface of the object. And now we can see our material has been applied. Getting a little closer to the surface, we can see how the roughness map affects the reflectivity of our material, and we can see the normal map creating these grooves on the wood floor surface. Now this is a very simple, basic material, But Unreal's material editor can do a lot more than this. It has a lot of power, as we saw in the previous video. So up next, we're going to look at taking this material a little bit further by using some of the other material expressions available to us in the material editor.